I'm Kaylee, and today I'm going to be talking about all 40 of the classics that I read in 2024. That's right, I read 40 classics this past year and enjoyed them all quite a lot. Before we dive into all the classics, I'm going to reach back here to our Booktuber Shoutout book, and we're going to shout out somebody randomly. Today's shout out goes to La Rosa Reads. I will leave a link to their channel in the description. Be sure to go over and subscribe to them. And if you haven't already, please do subscribe to this channel and give this video a thumbs up if you enjoy reading classics. And follow me over on Instagram and Storygraph and Goodreads and all the places. Right at the beginning of the year, I read 2 short stories by Robert Louis Stevenson, kind of like, not really short stories, more in between a short story and a novella. So like either a really long short story or a really short novella. But these were The Raja's Diamond and Providence and the Guitar. The Raja's Diamond I liked pretty well, but Providence and the Guitar was just weird and dumb, and I did not care for it. And through my Wrapped Books challenge, I read a whole bunch of books from like the 1910s, 1920s, 1930s. So some really lovely modern classics. One of those was The House of a Thousand Candles. This is a mystery that includes adventure and espionage and hidden treasure. I really enjoyed that one. I also enjoyed The Golden Snare. This is where a Mountie goes hunting a murderer in the Canadian wilderness and discovers a woman who is being held hostage. This one was really exciting. And I read The Hermit of Far End. A woman moves to a new town and hears about a man who lives in a wealthy estate and lives like a hermit and refuses to socialize. And of course, she is curious and gets to know him. This one is set right before World War I, and then as the story progresses, it's within the first couple of years of World War I. So it was really interesting learning about some of that history. I really loved Blue Anchor Inn. This is about a guy who gets married secretly and doesn't know who his bride is. The lawyers set up this marriage, and the bride wears a very thick veil, and he doesn't even know what she looks like. And a year later, they're supposed to get a divorce, but a woman shows up at the Blue Anchor Inn, and he wonders, could that be my wife? This was so hilarious. It was just so ridiculously funny, and I loved it. A Yank in the RAF is set during World War II about an American pilot who comes to London and joins the RAF in order to be close to the girl that he likes. He's really selfish and self-centered in the beginning, but through seeing the sacrifices of his fellow pilots in the war, he has some character development and turns out to be a fairly good guy. I didn't like his character though. By the time he finally had some character development, it was kind of like too little too late. But I did really enjoy reading about the history in this one. I also read Strawberry Acres. This is about a group of siblings who inherit this rundown old farm, and they decide to try to make it pay as a strawberry farm. I really loved this one because I love complex sibling relationships. There is a little bit of a romance in this one, but most of the focus was on the siblings, so I super loved it. And I also read Bachelors Bounty, where a young man is ordered to the country by his doctors, and he's supposed to have a very peaceful summer in the country. But the ladies just won't leave him alone. I really liked this one because while there is definitely a focus on the romance, the biggest focus is on this guy's character development. He really has to decide what kind of person he wants to be, and that kind of took precedence over the romance. I read The Ninth Earl, which is a murder mystery set in the 1600s, 1700s. I can't remember now. It's been several months since I read this one. It's the really olden times. This one was definitely interesting, and the murder mystery really kept me guessing. This one was a lot of fun. And I read The Royal Box, which is a murder mystery, I believe set in the 1920s or 30s. And someone is murdered in the royal box at the theater. This mystery I did not care for because it was just really boring. There's very little action. I didn't like any of the characters. It was okay, but it just wasn't that great. And I read 4 Agatha Christie mysteries. I read Crooked House. This one is about a young couple who are engaged, but the woman refuses to get married until they can solve her grandfather's murder. So the young man assists the police to investigate. And I read The Pale Horse. This is about the rumors that there could be a group of witches who can kill people with curses. And so a young man starts to investigate to find out, how do they do it? How do these people keep getting murdered? I read Hickory, Dickory, Death, which is a Poirot mystery, and I adore Poirot. This one centers around a student boarding house where some very mysterious things have been happening. Little objects going missing, some strange behavior from some of the tenants, and of course only Poirot can figure it out. In Appointment with Death, Poirot goes visiting Petra, and among the group of tourists is a very unhappy family, and when one of them dies under suspicious circumstances, Poirot has to figure out who the murderer is. I just love Agatha Christie, and I so enjoyed reading some of these mysteries this year. I also read King of the Wind. I used to be obsessed with horses, like every teenage girl when I was a kid. And so this kind of took me back to my childhood. It was just a really fun, horsey adventure. And you get to learn a little bit about history, too. I also read 2 short story collections from Louisa May Montgomery. I read After Many Days and Across the Miles. I have already read these short story collections many times before. This is kind of my go-to whenever I have a nightmare or I have insomnia. I just read a short story from Montgomery, and her stories are just so sweet and wholesome that it helps me calm down and get back to sleep. And these stories are so familiar to me from years and years of rereading them that it's not so exciting that's gonna keep me up at night. I also read an anthology of quotes from George McDonald that was edited and compiled by C.S. Lewis. This I really enjoyed. I would just read 1 or 2 pages every day, and then I would kind of mull it over and think about it and apply it to my life and take that little nugget of wisdom and pray over it. I really enjoyed these little snippets of wisdom from George MacDonald. I also read Thomas Wingfold, Curate. Now, I had previously read this like 20 years ago or something, but in an edited version. So this year, I was excited to read the unedited version, and I'm so glad that I did. It's all about Thomas Wingfold, who is a curate. He's a preacher, but he starts to lose his faith in God. He starts to have some serious doubts about God's existence. And so he kind of goes on this spiritual journey to rediscover his faith. It was really inspiring. And I read Kennworth. This one was really interesting because it takes all that portion of history with Queen Elizabeth and Walter Raleigh and Robert Dudley, all these figures from history. But then we have all these side characters who are just fictional characters. And we have a fabulous adventure. So Robert Dudley has a secret marriage with Amy Robsart, and the noble Tressilian tries to save her, but she doesn't want to be saved. So it was definitely an interesting adventure because how do you save the damsel in distress when she doesn't want to be saved? I absolutely adore Sir Walter Scott, and I loved this adventure. I read 3 Shakespearean plays this year, all of which I have already read before, but it was nice to revisit some of my favorites. I read Julius Caesar, and I read Henry V, which is probably my favorite out of all the historical plays. And I read As You Like It, which I have not read in something like 15 years since I've last read As You Like It, so it was really nice to go back and revisit that one. I also read Evelina. This is about a young girl who has been brought up in the country, but then she is thrust into London society, and she meets all sorts of different people, some of them not very nice. And it's kind of a coming-of-age tale as she learns to navigate high society. I really loved that it has an epistolary style. So you get all these different perspectives from several different characters. And some of them are kind of unreliable narrators, so you have to read between the lines a little bit. That one really had me intrigued. And then I reread A Study in Scarlet, which I've already read many times before, but I just love Sherlock Holmes. It's kind of like a comfort read because it's just so familiar. So I really enjoyed that one. And then for Jane Austen July, I read Sense and Sensibility in Spanish. I've really been enjoying going back every Jane Austen July the last couple of years and rereading Jane Austen in Spanish. You get such a different perspective and the stories become so fresh when it's in a different language, if you can get a good translation. And I read 3 books from Louisa May Alcott. I reread Under the Lilacs and 8 Cousins and Rose in Bloom. These are ones that I've been reading and rereading over and over since I was a kid. These are some of my favorites. These are like my comfort reads. So it was a lot of fun going back and revisiting those favorite stories. And another favorite, childhood favorite, that I went back and reread was the entire Little House of the Prairie series. So there are 9 books in that series, and I just kind of went through one every month, or 2 or 3 every month, and reread through the whole series. And I find that rereading it as an adult is just so different from when I read it as a child. It's like opening this little window to my childhood. And I also reread Little Women for, the 20th time, but this time in Spanish. So that one was another good one to go back and get this fresh perspective on the story. It just feels bright and new when you reread it in a different language. And those are the 40 classics that I read in 2024. Please leave me a comment and let me know what were some of your favorite classics that you've read this past year. Thanks for watching. Please subscribe, and remember, the right book in the right hands at the right time can change the world.